And so it really just requires money to be able to do what we do. But our heart from the beginning was to make sure as much as possible went to ministry that actually did something. Chip often says we don't want to just feel good, we want to do good. And that was really...
yeah, that's tough. That's tough because sometimes you got to ask, okay, is what we're giving actually doing good, or does it just make us feel good?
Yeah. So that is a filter that we use to make some decisions sometimes. And so that's how we tried to build budgets and how we tried to build systems early on. And it really informed and instructed how we would develop the church and what kind of church would we look like.
Welcome to Let's Talk About That, the podcast where we dive into conversations about life and share stories of faith. We're thrilled to be on this journey with you. Whether you're a longtime listener, someone who calls the Orchard home, or you're just stopping by, Let's Talk About That is your space to explore, reflect, and connect. Join us as we navigate the intricacies of faith, spiritual formation, and daily life as we invite guests to share their stories with us. So grab a cup of coffee, find a comfortable space, and let's do this together. This is Let's Talk About That, where you can be encouraged and inspired by God's work in our lives.
All right. Well, welcome back into Let's Talk About That. We are excited to have with us today our executive pastor here at the Orchard, the one, the only, Mr. Michael Federico.
Hey.
Let's see. Hold on. There we go. I have a button. I have a button. I asked Michael to come and sit down to talk with us on the podcast today, even though this is not his favorite thing to do, because not long ago, Michael, like maybe 2 weeks ago, a week and a half ago, I had some young guys in the church who found a podcast where some guys were talking about transparency inside of church finances and, sometimes the underbelly when things aren't handled well inside of churches, and just pique some questions that they had about our church and how we handle finances and what we believe about some of the things, they were saying in the podcast, certain principles that we have. And so I thought it would be a worthwhile conversation to ask Michael to sit down with us and talk about, some of those things, like what do we do with money at the Orchard? And if you attend this church, you may not know the answers to all of it. And I'm excited for you to hear the answers to those questions that you may have. I believe it's going to grow your confidence in who we are and how we operate as a church. But if you don't go to church at the Orchard, hopefully maybe it'll give you some ideas about what healthy churches do. I would say we have a healthy financial system and accountability system here at the Orchard. And if you lead a church, maybe it'll be helpful to you to think through some of your own policies. But before we jump into the podcast, let me say this, talking about church leaders. Tomorrow, the day this drops, tomorrow on Wednesday, we're going to be dropping a brand new podcast called the Impact Leadership Podcast. And this podcast is something that I'm going to be doing, putting it out there, and it's going to be really short, about 10 minutes each week, where we deal with specific leadership principles. It's going to be something that is targeted mainly for church leaders because that's who I am. That's the world I operate within. But I think the principles that we're going to talk about there are going to be so relevant and in a lot of ways practical that if you are a leader in any capacity, your church, your community, your home, your job, that it's going to be relevant to you. So I would encourage you to be on the lookout tomorrow for our brand new podcast that's going to drop, the Impact Leadership Podcast. And I'd love to hear your feedback on that. But for right now, we're going to jump into this conversation with Pastor Michael Federico and talk about church finances and other fun stuff. When I say let's talk about church finances, right, like immediately half the people listening to this turned off the podcast, didn't they?
Absolutely.
I know. It's not one of the most fun things to talk about, but I do think it's important for us to talk about it. So, Michael, you are an executive pastor. You've been in different roles within the church, and oftentimes those roles have had to do with administration. Why do you think that it is important for us to talk about finances and financial systems inside of the local church?
Well, one, I think finances, period. Jesus had a lot to say about money. I think often we shy away from conversations about money, or typical church leaders run away from conversations about money, not because
I identify with that comment.
Yeah. Not because there's anything to hide, but just because culture over the last 50 years has really made it difficult to have healthy conversations in ministries and churches about what it takes to operate and to do the work of the ministry, really.
Yeah, I think that, there is the stigma when we talk about finances in the church, because a lot of people feel, whether rightly or wrongly, that all churches care about are my money. They just want my money. And I will say this, I think that there are some churches and some types of churches, and we'll get into that in just a minute, the types of churches that really, in my opinion, are the ones that created the stereotype. But I think in most church contexts, local churches and communities like us here in North Central Florida, churches aren't rolling in money and care all about your money. As a matter of fact, most churches are struggling to make budget every year.
Yeah, I mean, I think if you've been in ministry for very long, I think you would say that it's been that way for a long time. I think statistically, it's pretty easy to show that there is not the financial support for churches and ministries that people, first of all, assume that there is, and secondly, that there used to be. A lot of that has to do with the way that pastors in the past have talked about money.
I was going to say, what do you mean when you say that? Like things that used to be?
Well, I think maybe more than 50 years ago, and to some degree more recently than that, it was easier to talk about giving and the need to be generous, not just to support the work of the ministry, but to do the work of mission and evangelism outside of the walls of the church. And so, I say that because as a kid, I can remember distinctly a pastor on television, saying basically, make your vow unto the Lord and send your check to bleep, bleep, bleep ministries. And and I was a kid, and I remember that being the first time I ever heard that. And I felt like that was a weird thing to do or to say. Yeah. And it's gotten more weird since then, I think.
I think it has in this podcast that these guys shared with us, and you listened to it as well.
I did.
He had a lot of examples of financial corruption inside of quote churches. Yeah. And I say quote churches because most of his examples weren't what I would say churches. I would say they were ministries of prosperity gospel preachers and televangelists that they themselves are the ministry. It wasn't like First Presbyterian, this town, or Third Baptist Church, or, Countryside Methodist. Like, these were televangelist, prosperity gospel type ministries where they are built on, hey, God wants you to be blessed financially, and the way for that to happen is you bless me financially.
Yeah, I think that's largely true. I mean, that's a big sweeping brush stroke that you just made there.
Look, if you guys don't know Michael and I, this is how our relationship works. The joke is that I'm Mr. Clarity, I'm Mr. Clarity, Michael's Mr. Certainty. Michael's going to be very certain about what he says, very specific, thus his answer to what I just said. I'm going to be very clear. I ain't got to be but 51% certain, and I'm going to make a big brush stroke of a statement.
Yeah, and to be clear,
that's what I just did.
Yeah, and to be clear, certainty does not always mean right. But in this case, I think largely you are right. I think often. Yeah.
There it is.
So it was recorded. So you've got a record that I said you were right about something. But I think by and large, these ministries often started as churches with people who were called to the gospel ministry and felt like they were doing something right. I think where it became purely corrupted is where we have seen media empires built around that. And thus you've got a worldwide reach and ministry. And again, that really started basically 50 years ago, maybe a little more, a little less. Yeah. And I think that is where largely we may have seen folks go off the reservation.
Well, and that's why, in the podcast where the guy's talking, he said things like, it's not uncommon for, churches and pastors to have jets. And I'm like, yes, it is.
It is very uncommon.
Incredibly uncommon. Yeah. I've got a 2016 F-150. I don't have a jet, Yeah. But his broader point, and I think this is the first thing I really want us to dig into, is in his mind, the church doesn't have anything to do with money, and all money does is corrupt the church. That anytime the church gets organizational, it gets corrupted and it's all about money. And I just don't believe that that's true at all.
Yeah. And I think the way that he has couched that is by saying we've turned church into a business. And I don't think that's accurate at all. I feel like if that is the case, most of these church businesses across the land are struggling and losing money often. And, you know, I think that he's just missed it there.
Well, let's at least lean into his idea here and start here in our conversation. Is I do think it's possible for churches to become more institutions than organisms, right? Because the church is a living thing, the body of Christ. But to think that churches don't need to have organizations and structures and funding, I mean, I think that in a lot of ways, that's just ignorance of what is in the New Testament. I think the New Testament records organizational principles of the New Testament church, how they made sure they did ministry effectively and efficiently, how they scaled. It talks about leadership. It talks about hierarchy of leadership, and it talks about the collection and distribution of money. I think all of those things are in the New Testament. But I think, Michael, you and I have seen in, just experience from being around church world for so long, there are times where it seems that the institution of the church has outgrown the ministry of the church.
Yeah, I think that has to do, though, with, that's a leadership issue, I think. And we talk about that a lot, right? The trellis and the vine and that whole idea of...
Unpack that. I don't know that we've ever actually talked about that on the podcast. We talk about it with our staff and leaders a lot, but I don't know that we've ever talked about it on here.
Yeah, and so the idea being that the church, the people that make up the church are considered the vine, and, a vine does not grow well without something to grow on. And so you need structure, and the structure is the trellis. And there's a book. I don't remember the authorship. What's his name? It's actually two guys, right?
It is. It's two guys. And if you hadn't asked me, I could tell you, they're Australian guys, actually. Shoot. Well, we'll drop it in the show notes.
Yeah. So the idea, though, is that the church cannot grow and be effective without both trellis and vine. And so we're called to do vine work, but that vine work requires us to also build and take care of a trellis. And so there has to be some structure and some systems that help us be effective. Podcast guy says, the body does not need systems and structure. And in my way of thinking, if evangelism, discipleship, and spiritual formation on a global scale really happened without structure and the support of systems, I think here we are 2,000 years later. At this point in history, there would not be institutional or organized churches as we know them today. And I think that... and
that's a really good point, is we're not just informed by the writings of the New Testament, but... although imperfect, we have a long history of the church to draw upon, and godly men and women and leadership that have come before us who've thought about these same issues.
Yeah, absolutely. And I would, I'm always careful about how I say these things, but I really do believe that the structured body of Christ in the world is God's plan for reaching it. And
I agree completely. Local church is the hope of the world, right? One of the specific references that this guy made in his podcast was about a high-profile televangelist, prosperity gospel teacher who had bylaws for the church that she led, but in the bylaws it essentially said that at any time I can choose not to operate by any of these and do whatever I want. That is essentially the way he described it. I have no idea if that's true or not, but it does point to the fact that there are some situations in churches where the pastor, the leadership of the church, does act very unilaterally, makes decision. It's his church. And it's so funny because I have students ask me often, not adult students will ask me, so do you own the church? I said, no, I don't own the church. Who owns the church? And I say, well, Jesus owns the church. And then they look at me like, wait, what? But in some cases, the pastor, the leader, does own the organization. So that is not true for most churches. It's not true for the Orchard.
Yeah.
We do have systems set up to provide accountability to the staff who provides leadership to the church. So would you lean into that for just a minute, Michael, like how we at the Orchard have tried to make sure that our staff and our leadership have accountability from the people that we're leading to make sure that stays healthy?
Okay, first, because I'm Mr. Certainty, we're going to go back to what he said and kind of address that quickly, just because I think that it's helpful for people to really kind of understand that. And
I'll be honest with you, I really wish I still had my nerd sound effect.
Yeah,
right now.
okay,
But go ahead.
So make sure I get back to your question. But to be clear, there are churches, quote unquote churches, that the pastor owns the property, that he, if the church has vans, whatever, he owns it all. Where that is different from what this guy is saying is, in that case, they are not qualified to be a nonprofit, right? They cannot be a 501c3 if that is the case. Now, the bylaws that were described, the pastor that he was talking about, she happens to be incorporated in the state of Florida, and Florida statute would not allow a church with bylaws and governing documents like that really to be classified as a nonprofit. So nonprofit law in the state of Florida does a pretty good job of clarifying what is allowable.
Yeah. And to be clear, I think we would say, quote, yes and amen to the need for there to be accountability on these things. So people can't just run roughshod unilaterally, however they want to over these issues. But we don't need to look to the government to provide accountability. We need to look to the local church to provide accountability for itself.
Yeah. And the only reason I pointed that out is to be
That's
clear.
a good clarification.
The only reason I really pointed that out is this guy was saying there is not a mechanism for keeping these kinds of things from happening. And I would argue that by and large there is, but much like anything else, if you want to cheat, you can cheat, and you may get away with it for a little while. But I don't think in the long term that's going to serve anybody well.
So circle back, because church leadership structures, accountability structures look different in different contexts and different denominations. But here at the Orchard, because you were right with Pastor Eddie when the Orchard was founded, you worked with him to set up how we are structured. And in many ways, that structure, though it's been tweaked, has remained, consistent. Yeah. So why don't you talk a little bit about how we try to structure the Orchard in particular to provide some accountability?
So again, to be clear, we did not do that in a vacuum. We had a team of people around us to provide accountability, even in that process. That has been our desire as a church from the beginning. And so early on, we established a management team that helped us look at those things to make sure that we were doing the things that we ought to do in ways that were not just legal, but were also honoring to God. And so we wanted to be sure that we did that. And so the way that we do that even now is we've continued with a management team. The people on that team see everything. They sign off, at least on some level, for everything.
So I was going to say, just double click for a minute.
Yeah.
What are the responsibilities of the management team?
Yeah.
Like, what do they oversee?
So they do not dictate ministry, specifically how we operate the ministry or the outreach of the church. What they do is help us be accountable in the area of risk management, in the area of finances, and specifically also in a way that helps us to guard ourselves legally and just provide oversight and accountability. And so anything to do with that, they see it. We have conversations around that, and they act, for lack of a better term, for us as a board. And so, none of our staff has voting privileges on that board. We're just there to provide information.
You and I sit in there to answer questions if they have them, but that's it.
That's correct. And before you is Eddie. And so oftentimes, I feel like they want maybe less information, but we try really hard to make sure they have more information than they maybe really want sometimes, just so that we do a good job of covering all of our bases and just making sure that everything is above board and that we're doing it right. So
yeah, so you said already, and let's stick with the management team for a minute, that they oversee, our finances. They meet, they look at financial statements, they help put together a budget that we present to the church as a whole to be voted on. But man, this is going to be difficult because this is something that you and I could nerd out on. And there may be people out there who are super interested in it, but most people probably aren't interested in it at the level that you and I are interested in it. But talk about a little bit about our system when it comes to money, in the fact of how we try to make sure that we stay above reproach with the way that we handle our finances, because that's a big deal.
Yeah. So we really focus hard on what are known as internal controls. None of us as staff, unless that is their position and responsibility, handle money. And so
one of the things that Michael says often when we hire new staff is there's two things that will get people in ministry in trouble often, and that is sex and money. So you better make sure that you have guardrails around the one, and we'll help make sure you have guardrails around the other.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I probably say it a little more strongly than that, but yes, thank you. And so we do everything that we can, to protect and safeguard our staff and volunteers. We try to make sure that there's, although all of these people have our full confidence, we try to make sure that everybody has accountability. And I think that the best way to protect everybody involved and to head mistakes off, to avoid those as early and often as possible, is to make sure that there are people with you and that it's part of a process. And so anybody who handles money coming in does not handle money going out. We have multiple people overseeing what comes in and what goes out. And then it's documented, carefully documented.
Yeah. And by several people,
Yes.
I would say, that this never really crossed my mind, but I saw it as so helpful since I've been in the lead pastor role at the Orchard. You requested from the management team their, head nod, green light, not necessarily them to vote on anything, but to say, hey, I would like to pay this accounting firm to run an audit on us just to make sure that our controls are in place and that we're operating the way that we need to. And to me, I'm sitting back, I'm like, that's a great idea, because we need to be able to check ourselves, because by the time that somebody else needs to check us, things have gotten way out of control.
Yeah, absolutely. We've actually invited 2 different audit firms to look at us, and basically they've taken a look at our internal controls mainly, because that's where you can head off all of the issues that you can run into as both a business or a nonprofit. And so we've invited them to do that. They've looked at our internal controls, and in both cases said, really, you don't need a full audit because you have these things in place. We do have a firm in Orlando that manages our 990T. One of the things that the brother on the podcast stated was churches don't have to do that. What he said was accurate there. Churches are not required to file a 990 with.
I'm going to pretend like I know what a 990 is.
It's an informational return that nonprofits are required. So foundations, all manner of nonprofits. There is an exclusion for churches.
Yeah, I mean, I knew that, obviously.
I'm saying it for everybody else. And so, but the reason that they excluded it for churches specifically is there are so many small churches. It would be financially and functionally burdensome for most churches.
Yeah, because, I mean, truth be told, most churches don't have an executive pastor, Michael, or we don't have an Aaron, who was our financial assistant, who does that. They don't have a Mary who helps reconcile reports and expenditures. Yeah. They have a retired husband and wife, or one or the other, who, are doing the best they can.
Absolutely. And just to be clear, this church, the Orchard, has for a number of years filed a 990T, and specifically that is because we do have some minimal tax liability. And so we file it. We write checks. We make those quarterly deposits, and we take care of that.
So you heard it here first. Our church pays taxes.
Yes. Technically, our church pays taxes.
So let me say that, or ask this, Michael, if let's say there is another church leader that's listening to this, or somebody that attends another church and wonders about, church financial systems, what would be like just a couple of key things you would tell them that they should give attention to if they want to make sure they have a healthy financial system at their church?
I think the first thing goes back to internal controls, and the struggle for many smaller churches is having enough people to do that in a way that's healthy, meaning you have more than one person who signs checks, meaning you have the person who reconciles bank statements is not the person who is writing those checks. You're managing all of those things. You've got multiple counters who provide accountability. They're using sealed or secure deposit bags for cash deposits, all of those things. And so I find for most small churches, the thing that they really struggle with the most is enough people to really do a good job with the internal control part.
Sure. And I think that really goes to something that I feel strongly about when it comes to churches, quote, being taxed, right? Because this guy's go ahead.
Really, really quick, just to go back, because I don't want to get anybody's back up about us paying taxes. We're a little bit complicated in the things that we've got going on and the way that we're structured for several different reasons. And, I'd love to talk to you one-on-one about that. But because of that, currently we do have a small amount of unrelated business income. And there's a specific reason that we're getting hit with that. There's nothing wrong with it. I don't personally like it, but we owe the tax. We're going to pay the tax. That's and right. We're going to spend whatever it takes for us to do things the right way. And so that's what because we're pretty complicated as a multi-site church with a daycare that owns properties and all of this, that we seek these external audits and everything because we're saying, hey, we're complicated. We don't want to be missing anything. We want to do it correctly. Yeah.
I think that is good. But so when it comes to churches paying taxes, this guy in the podcast that you and I listen to, Michael, and he's not the only one, voices call churches, tax the church, tax the church, tax the church. And honestly, part of me, I get that when you see some of these mega prosperity ministries that own all these acres and buildings and jets. I understand the idea and the heart there, but I don't think what most people don't realize when you say tax the church is if that were to happen, there would be so many small and primarily urban churches, but small urban and rural churches that would shut down.
Yeah. They are barely making it now. Yes. And it would absolutely put them in a financial bind that may close the doors. Absolutely.
Yeah. Because there are churches, there is a church that I know of that is a part of one of the networks that we associate in that needed some work done, I think with their roof and some bathrooms or something. And our network of churches pulled together some money to help support that. But because they are inside of the city limits of one of the growing cities in North Florida, if they had to pay property taxes on that land, there's no way they couldn't afford to fix the roof over the bathrooms.
Yeah, absolutely.
And it would be a mess. So I hear the heart behind people who say tax the church. You're not thinking of what is the typical church in America when you're thinking of that.
Yeah, I think, to talk about another thing that he brought up, and really, I think this is the heart of where you're headed is, he mentions the idea of churches or ministries that have yachts and private jets. And
he said yachts.
Yeah, no kidding. And, 40,000 square foot homes and things like that. And the idea of inurement, which is the term.
Say it one more time.
Inurement.
Inurement.
Yes, that's the one.
Inurement.
Yes.
Sounds kind of like Numenor.
Yeah. And it's one of the things that
Numenor was specifically by J.R. Tolkien. Anyway, go ahead.
Yeah. I'm not sure anybody really cares about that.
No, I just figured while we're talking about nerdy stuff, we might as well keep talking about it.
Okay. And so inurement is one of the things that is clearly illegal. It's illegal in the state of Florida. It is illegal in the United States of America for anybody as a part of a nonprofit to personally profit or have gain because of their association with the nonprofit. So that means exorbitant salaries, crazy bonuses, private jets, $200,000 Land Rover. Those things are probably a little bit excessive. And Chip has
a whole nother world.
It is. Well, to quote one of the pastors that this guy calls out, that's an HNL, a whole nother level. So, but the point being, there is a problem there, right? And that whole idea, I can tell you nobody that I know as a pastor of a church or as a staff member of a church is personally benefiting in any of those ways. And so I think to just broadly characterize the church, the organized church in America, period, as that is a little bit off the.
That
crazy.
brother's broad brush makes me look like I'm working with like a fingernail paintbrush or something. Like I think I paint with a broad brush. He was way out there.
Yeah.
Well, this has been just all like light work stuff that we're talking about. I want to dive into something that may be a little bit more complicated that he brings up. And I think it's a question that a lot of people who may have always been a little skeptical of the church have thought about. If you're telling me that I need to give to the Lord or give to God, then why in the world am I writing the check then to your church? You know, if I'm supposed to give to God, fine. Why does that have to be through the church?
Well, I'm not sure how else you would clearly direct any funds that you would want to give to God if you did not use a church specifically. I think that you can do things for people or give to people in Jesus' name, but specifically if you're going to give to God, I think that throughout the New and Old Testament, the picture of how we do that is through an organized structure of some kind that helps to support the work in the ministry.
Yeah. I think you look at the teachings of Jesus when he was talking about the widow giving at the temple. You look at Paul's teaching as he's taken up offering for other brothers and sisters in Christ. Like they both recognize that when that gift is given to the church or the temple, in that case, that was an act of giving it unto God. Now, I would say I think that's a little bit of a muddy water for me, right? Because I'm thinking of somebody like a Trey Lee, right? Trey Lee is our area Fellowship Christian Athletes, director. And we have people in our church who support him and his ministry monthly. That's not a church. I think that's an offering to the Lord that they're making.
Sure.
I think there have been situations where I have seen someone that we knew or worked with or whatever personally had a relationship with in need. And Leanne and I tried to help financially them meet that need. And when we gave that, we were giving it because of our love for the Lord and our love for that person. But primarily, when I think about the gift that we give to God, it is through the local church because it is a sacrifice. It's me giving it open-handed. It's me saying, this is my church home. I'm giving it to God through his body, the church that I attend.
Yeah. So apart from the sacrifice that was given for atonement of sin or like that, a part of giving, even in the Old Testament, was for the support of the ministry. In other words, the Levites took some of that meat and they used it to feed their families or the body that served at the temple. And so I think that there's a distinction there, though, from what we do for one another, because I would say that what we give through an organization, a ministry like FCA, or what we give through a church, that is unto the Lord, right? And so I think other giving, what we do for other people, is as unto, right? It is like that, but it is not that. And that's a personal opinion, but that's how I characterize that. And I think we are called to do both, right? We're called individually and corporately to take care of widows and orphans. But ministries and churches have specific things that they are called to do that are outside of that, maybe on top of that, but specifically particularly towards evangelism, reaching people around the world, helping people grow through spiritual formation. So I think when we do things to help meet physical needs, we are called to do that. By the way, I think the church is called to do that. And I think largely the church has abdicated that responsibility to the government. And that's part of why we're in the situation that we are socially, culturally, and politically today. And so I think
100% agree.
Yeah. So the church has a responsibility. People have a responsibility individually. I think there's a little bit of a distinction there, but I would say that's a personal belief and conviction that I have. I don't know that I could do a great job backing that up with scripture in a way that provides that clear distinction.
So I think here's what I would say. If you are uncomfortable giving to your local church, there's probably a reason why, and you need to figure out what that reason is.
Yeah.
If you are going to 100% gut level honesty say, I'm going to give to God, I just don't think that has to be through the church, then you just better make sure that's not an excuse to keep as much of your money as you can. Because the New Testament measure of giving, in my opinion, Michael, you and I have had this conversation, the New Testament measure of giving is not, well, you got to give 10%. That's it. If you're not giving 10%, it's a sin. The measure of New Testament giving is, what are you keeping? How are you living? Right. Are you living in your own comfort, or are you giving sacrificially for the sake of your neighbor and the glory of the Lord? Like, I think that you just need to check your own heart. You ain't ever going to hear me argue with you saying, no, you can't, you got to give that money to the church. No, I ain't going to argue with you. If that's where you're convicted of, do it. Make sure you're actually giving that money, because I would bet that homeboy on that podcast that was talking about, well, he said, render under Caesar things that are Caesar, gods the things that are gods. He didn't say nothing about the church. I want to bet homeboy's giving to God really revolves around his own bank account personally, but that's just me. Anyway, let me hop into this, because I do think that part of the legitimate question about giving to the local church has to do with, okay, when I give to the local church, where does that money go? Where does the money go when I give to the local church? Because there are organizations and studies given to show how much money that goes into a nonprofit goes out. Yeah. And in this podcast you and I listened to, the guy said, hey, on average, 6% of the money that goes into a church goes out of the church. And I have to say, I don't know that I disagree with him on that, but I also think that if you think that money leaving the church is the only way that the church gives back to the community, to the people, to the kingdom, to the mission, then you're not understanding what the church is, or you're at the wrong one. Because the church does way more than that. So let's do this. Let's talk about, what does it look like typically? Where does money go typically inside of the church? And what does that even look like at the Orchard? And we could just talk big numbers on a percentage basis, but I think this is a good conversation for people to be aware of.
Well, I've said for a long time that nobody really wants to give to pay light bills and to keep things painted, or they don't want to pay anybody to mow the grass.
Nobody wants to put money in the offering to pay light bills. 100%.
Yeah. And so, when Eddie and I started, man, we both came from legacy type First Baptist churches with, I forget his number, but I remember distinctly mine was it was right at about 40% is what it took to run just facilities.
I think his might have been even a little higher than that.
And so we were just, because I'm Mr. Certainty, I wanted him to not talk about this quite so much, but I remember him saying, we don't ever want to own buildings. And the reality is, I knew then, and what I know for sure now is, we have to have places to meet if we're going to be an organized corporate church. And when I say corporate, I don't mean like business, state certified.
If we want to be a gathering, we need a room to gather in.
That's a better way to say it. And so it just takes stuff. And let's just be honest. If people are going to gather, we live in Florida, they want air conditioning. And so there's that. And so it really just requires money to be able to do what we do. But our heart from the beginning was to make sure as much as possible went to ministry that actually did something. Chip often says we don't want to just feel good. We want to do good. And that was really,
that's tough. That's tough because sometimes you got to ask, okay, is what we're giving actually doing good, or does it just make us feel good?
Yeah. So that is a filter that we use to make some decisions sometimes. And so that's how we tried to build budgets and how we tried to build systems early on. And it really informed and instructed how we would develop the church and what kind of church would we look like. And so, I hate to tell you, but our facilities expense has gone up a lot. But
yeah,
it is, it's just necessary.
Well, I think the circumstances that you and Eddie were in, and I want to say nothing against the churches. They were good churches. It was just, like you say, legacy churches, downtown properties, buildings.
Expensive. It's just expensive.
Yeah. But it's not, you can do your own research and come up with the same percentages because it's fairly standard percentages that are just big ballpark figures. Yeah. So typically in churches, that budget's broken down to somewhere between 40 and 60% of that budget's going to go to staffing. That's right. Usually the biggest percentage of a church's budget is to go to staffing.
That's true.
Facilities can range anywhere from 20% to 40% or above. Missions and outreach, I think the standard, probably because of the Old Testament tithe, the standard that churches try to do to support outside missions is 10 to 15%, of the budget. Ministry programs can be anywhere from 10 to 20% of the budget. And then churches try to save for reserves, emergency, building programs, whatever. So those are just like big ballpark numbers for what most churches in America operate within. So, Michael, where are we at in some of those areas here at the Orchard? Like, we're all about transparency on the podcast. So.
Yeah. So, to be honest, we have struggled and pushed to get more going out the door to work outside of the walls of the church for a long time. I'll tell you, over the trailing 12 months that just ended in August, our mission spending was about 14%. What actually, was doing that. Facilities expense, 10%.
So that's a big deal. It's probably not always going to be the case, but to have missions expenditure higher than facilities expenditure, that's a big deal. That's uncommon.
It is uncommon. Our goal has always been, and I hesitate to say this because people they'll be outside with signs now saying 20%, but our goal originally was we wanted to be at 20%. And that's why I said it's been a struggle, because 20% that's a big number for us as a church plant in the beginning. And it's as we've tried to open new sites and reach people in different places, it's been harder and harder to do that. And so we've even this year, we made a commitment to take an additional on top of what we had planned to do throughout last year. I think we committed an additional $144,000 to this year.
$150,000.
So we've really worked at that. Our admin expense, and this is just like a small part of what it takes to do what we do, is about 2%. Payroll over that trailing 12 months was 43%. So
to be honest, that's lower than I thought it would be.
Yeah, those are the big numbers. Now, to be clear, that payroll number, we've had some vacancies that we've been trying to fill for that period. So it probably would have been higher than that.
And it goes up. And to me, that's the thing, though, right? That if you were only measuring the ministry or mission of your church by the money that leaves the doors of the church, then you're missing some of that, right? Because when we pay people, we don't pay people to, and this is just how we are at the Orchard, we don't pay people to, quote, keep office hours. so that we're here at the office. You got to clock in, clock out. No, we say we want you with our people. We want you serving our people. We want you talking to people. We want you in the community, invested, whether that is at football practice, leading a huddle or heading to the school. I'm thinking of things that we did this week, heading to the schools to give donuts to the teachers, to having people out to lunch, to talk about the struggles that they're facing with family. I mean, just like that's ministry that our staff does. The ministry programs that we have on Sunday mornings, on Wednesday nights. Like we had skate night on Wednesday night with all of the students from all of our locations, plus a lot of others that showed up. That's not a cheap event, but that is money that on paper looks like stayed inside the church. Yeah. But really, we had a room of 300 young people from all over the place that we were able to love on and provide a safe and friendly environment for them to hear about Jesus and connect with student ministries. And so I think it's just very reductionistic to think if that money doesn't leave the church, then the church isn't being generous. We try to live open-handed at the Orchard.
Our focus is not just in ministering to or sending money, out the door specifically for reaching people across the world. We really do try to live generously throughout the week. We want our staff to be generous where we can. We want to love on and treat our volunteers well. It is, there's a lot to what we do. We try to be a simple church, but that does not mean that there's not a lot going on. And frankly, that it doesn't cost a lot to be able to do it.
Yeah, I think it really is, in my opinion, a trust in leadership, a trust in structures and systems and accountability that you really need to understand if you want to feel comfortable giving to your church. Like if you trust the leadership at your church, you're going to feel comfortable giving.
100%.
If you're not so confident in your leadership, which let's be honest, sometimes that's the feeling. I mean, I'm very certain when, this young guy took over for the founding pastor at the Orchard, there were some people who were like, maybe that's a good idea, I guess. Yeah. But then that's when you need to know. But there are systems and structures in place to make sure that this money gets to where it needs to go and that we handle it correctly. So when you trust your leadership and know that there's accountability structures in place, I feel like it's going to help grow your confidence when you give to the church, because when you give to the church as an act of giving to God, you don't need to have doubts in the back of your head.
Yeah. And so that's huge for us. We have spent a lot of time and energy over the last 18 years to be very focused on building trust. We want people to be able to trust what we say we're going to do. We want to make sure that we are doing the things that engender trust, because trust is quickly lost and it takes a long time to build. And so that is why we've got I say that the two things that are going to get you out of here the fastest are, money and sex, because those are two areas where trust is lost the fastest and in the biggest way.
Well, and quite honestly, it's where the church has shown itself vulnerable.
Absolutely.
Church leadership has shown itself vulnerable historically.
Absolutely. And so, and that's why we're going to come down hard on those things. It's why we're really hard on staff in the beginning before, they learn kind of the procedures of things, because it's nothing for somebody to walk up to a student, one of our student guys, and say, hey, here's $100, use this for student ministry. That's going to get you in trouble. Do not take that $100, say, please put that in the chest on a Sunday, or mail a check to the office or give online. But absolutely do not take that money and put it in your pocket, because it creates a little doubt, right? It allows that little seed of doubt in somebody's mind who sees that transaction. Oh, he took money and he put it in his pocket. Even if he takes it out the next morning at the office and says, hey, this was given for this, that is why we're so careful about those things.
It's funny that you mentioned that, because I was having a conversation with Scott Paulson, who leads our cafe team here in Lake City. Yeah. And he was saying that it's not an irregular occurrence for somebody to try to tip them or to, ask where they make a donation to the cafe, because the coffee we give out's free. The donuts we give out's free. And by the way, that's not a small expense, but that ain't a big percentage of our budget too. Right. Like that's not, But Scott's answer is, brother, if you want to give, you better go put it in the box.
Yeah, that's right.
That's where giving goes. Giving goes 100%. To the box. And that's why really historically at the Orchard, we have also shied away from designated giving.
Absolutely.
If you don't know what that is, designated giving is when people say, I want to give to blank. I want to give to the cemetery fund. I want to give to build a new playground.
We don't have a cemetery, by the way.
I want to give to all these things.
That's right.
And what happens is, if that is the case and you allow that money to be designated, then we are legally responsible to make sure that money is spent in that area. And oftentimes, if you've been around church world, there can be strings attached to that money.
Sure.
Like the running joke is that anytime, somebody at, Country Town Baptist Church or whatever would get mad at the preacher, they would just send their tithe to the cemetery fund. And that's why there's so many large cemetery funds in the area. But the truth is, because we know we have good systems in place, we know that we try to make sure our finances stay healthy, and we want you to be able to trust the leadership. We say, hey, look, if you want to give, you give in the box. Yep. And if there's something that you want to see done, or then we'll look at trying to get it done. I want to give this because I want to help this family over here. Hey, we'll try to do our best to help that family over there, but you can't designate that money and say, go spend it. Then at that point, we're just washing your money for you,
Well, and to be clear,
that just made Michael's skin about crawl off his back when I said that, by the way.
It's also not legal. So
it's not. But I do think that that's why trust your leadership. Find out what systems you have in place at the church if you don't know and it bothers you, But when you give, the Lord says that we are to give with a joyful heart. That means that you need to have confidence. That means that you need to be glad that you get to be a part of what the Lord is doing in your local church, because I fully 100% believe, and I don't think this is biased at all, when people at the Orchard give to the Orchard, you are making an investment in eternity.
Absolutely.
100% agree. And we take that seriously, and we want to make sure that we are good stewards of what you're giving. And that doesn't mean we're here to build up bank accounts, being good stewards. No, we want to make sure that we are investing in people. We're investing in communities. We're investing in ministry and mission, that we are investing in impacting eternity for generations to come. Yeah.
When you give to the church or to a ministry, really, you ought to have the confidence that you are making an investment. It should be your eternity, 401k, however you wanted to think about that. But what you give in those ways is an investment in impact somewhere else. Maybe it's here, but often it is in a way that you may or may not see. And I think it is just so important to think about it that way, because when we hold on to those things, whenever we're super careful to make sure that we get to see every dollar that gets spent going out to take care of, not to pick on orphans in Africa, but that used to be a very common thing. And by the way, we do help support that. We have over a long period of time, but you're just not going to be able to see all of that. To be honest, one of the reasons we launched the magazine, the book, was so that we could talk more about the things that we do as a church, to add to that transparency, to help people see where
it's going,
where are we investing as a church, and for
there's a whole list of ministry and mission partners.
Absolutely.
When you give $1 to the Orchard, that dollar gets split up in a lot of places. When you give $1 to whatever, you give $1 to whatever, So I think that is one of the cool things about being in the church, is that because we're able to support so many missions, so many ministries, do so much in our own communities, that dollar goes a lot more places to have a lot bigger impact, which, hey, diversify that portfolio, baby.
Yeah, absolutely.
Diversify your eternal investment.
Yeah, absolutely. I know that many of our folks probably, grew up in the Southern Baptist system. And, I remember getting asked often, who's Annie Armstrong and Lottie Moon, and when are we going to get these girls paid off? And,
you are completely lost right now if you have not grown up at a Southern Baptist church. If you did, that's hilarious.
Yeah, it is. But we've really tried to, in addition to cooperative program giving, where we partner with churches across America to help support missionaries and mission work, also church planning stateside, In addition to that, we have some ministries that we're connected to, some mission partners that some of them attend our churches when they're in country. And so we love them and we want to support them as well. There are a lot of ministries that are in our communities and they're valuable. They need our support and we feel like it's important to be able to do that. And so, when you feel like you can't give to all of those things, rest assured that those things that we really are confident that those organizations that are doing a really good job at what they're called to do, we want to help support them and see their work thrive, because we as a church can't do all of those things.
Yeah,
we just can't.
Right. That's right. And I think that's why, we have confidence in saying, man, we feel like when you give to the Orchard, it's a good investment in eternity, because we're confident in the people that we partner with and we're confident in the ministries that we support. And when you give, we feel like that we got a great, pool of resources and people that really makes a difference for. So anyway, I know this has been just an electric conversation for you to listen to about church finances and other fun stuff. But Michael, any final words to leave us with before we sign off?
Yeah. If you have questions about where you're giving, if you don't go to our church, if you have questions, if you have some trust issues, that's really something for you to explore. I've heard it simplified all the way down to this. Hey, churches are called to take care of widows and orphans. Well, I would go further than that and say we are called, right, individually to take care of widows and orphans, but there is that obligation, that responsibility. And so if you don't feel like your church is focused on the things that a biblical New Testament church should be focused on, then I think, you need to pray through that and work that out. You got questions for us, man, we invite those. We want to give you any information that you need to be comfortable and to increase your trust level with what we're doing with finances. And so I'd invite you to do that.
Yeah, I think, and maybe this is saying it too much, Michael, but I think most of the pastors that I know would not be offended with someone just coming in having general questions about how the church is structured, how it's financially structured. I believe they would be happy for you to know that, because I think most pastors want you to feel confident when you give.
100%. I would say this: if that's an issue and he's not willing to have that conversation, maybe that is a red flag and something you need to consider. But yeah, absolutely. And so, get comfortable with that, because here's one thing I would say, and I mentioned it quickly in passing earlier. I think many people assume it's kind of a group mentality, like somebody else is giving, so maybe I don't need to, or that's not really something that I need to be thinking about. I would say to some level or to some degree, everybody should be considering how they support the work of mission and ministry. And so it may not be our church, but at your church or through organizations, I just really feel like we as God's people are called to support the work of mission and ministry. And somebody's got to do it. So you can't assume that somebody else is doing it, because I'll tell you, I hear that a lot. And let me just say this. I think we're all assuming that more people are supporting or giving ministries and missions and churches than really are. That's a really
good word. That's a really good word.
I would say that, Americans are generous. That gets talked about periodically, usually around some disaster or that kind of thing. It's true. But the fact is, I think you have to be careful about assuming that somebody else is doing all the giving, and it doesn't mean that we shouldn't be praying about and considering how we can be generous.
Yeah. All right. I think that's a good word, because one of the things we say, right, we're able to be generous as a church because you were just generous as an individual. Right. And I think that's true. Well, one final reminder, tomorrow, if you're listening to this on the day it drops, tomorrow, Wednesday, we are going to be launching the Impact Leadership Podcast. I hope you'll check it out. Hope it's helpful to you. If you don't go to the Orchard, tell your pastor, tell your ministry leaders, hey, check this out. I listen to this guy sometimes and he's kind of weird, so maybe it'll be weird for you too. I don't know, but check it out and hopefully it'll be helpful to you. Until then, we will see you right back here next week on Let's Talk About That.
Thanks for joining us for this episode of Let's Talk About That. We hope it encouraged and challenged you as we continue to grow on this journey of faith and embrace community together. If you have any questions, thoughts, or feedback, we'd love to hear from you. Reach out to us through our social media channels or visit our website to stay connected. Your support is what makes this podcast impactful. If you found today's discussion meaningful, don't forget to subscribe to the podcast, share the episode with a friend, and leave a review. Your engagement helps us spread the message and connect with others who can be encouraged through these conversations. Until next time, we hope this episode inspired you to live out your faith this week. Keep the conversations alive and remember we're all on this journey together.